Hi everybody, welcome to our second video. This week we're going to be looking a little bit more at energy resources, covering the things that you should have been doing this week from your energy booklet. All of the stuff this week focuses on why energy consumption is increasing and the role that technology has to play in that increase in amount of energy being consumed. First thing I want to do is to show you a little graph of how energy consumption has changed. And if we look at this graph, we can see that it's a very, very clear pattern of increasing energy consumption. We go back to 1965, we can see it's around 4,000 million tonnes of oil equivalent in terms of global energy consumption. And we can see over time that had doubled by the time we get to about 1990, and therefore has tripled by the time we get to the end of this graph in 2013-14. Obviously the graph is a little bit old, but the pattern has remained the same since. So really this video is all about helping us to understand why energy consumption is increasing and what role technology has to play in all of that. So we're going to start by taking a little look at the first page from your booklet, so page 9. So what I've done is I've written up some of the notes that you might have made into the different sections of the booklet. I've simply done that to try and save us a little bit of time rather than me having to write while I'm talking you through all of these things. So feel free to pause the video at any point and add to your notes or to change things, correct things that you might have written while you've been doing this independently. The first activity was to look at all of these different images in this hexagons here and try and think about how these things are causing energy consumption to increase. So we really are here focusing on the causes of that increasing energy consumption. The first image here is all to do with agriculture, and particularly maybe the technology that is involved within that agriculture. As our population has risen, there is an increasing demand for food. People want to eat more food, and simply because we've got more people, we need more food as well. The other thing that's happening is that agriculture is becoming what we would call more intensive. So you might remember when we looked at the UK section of this topic, we looked at agribusiness. One of the examples we looked at might have been Thanet Earth, those greenhouses in Kent where they use a lot of technology, a lot of energy, a lot of inputs in order to grow that food. The other thing related to agriculture and food is also the packaging and the transport of our food. As we start to import and export foods around the world, that requires lots of packaging. It also requires lots of energy in the transport of that food, whether that's by plane or by ship, or even just by lorry around the UK. So those are the three main reasons why agriculture is contributing to a rise in energy consumption. The second thing is industry. So here we're thinking about factories and production. And as countries start to industrialise, and as the world more generally starts to industrialise, we are producing more goods. With more factories, we are making more stuff, and that means energy consumption is going to increase. A great example of that is obviously China. We know that lots of our things get manufactured in China, and as a result of that, China's energy consumption has grown really, really significantly. And if we look ahead to the future, one thing that is going to happen is that most of the demand growth, as in when we look to the future, thinking about how things will change, which countries are going to start to use more energy, 90% of that growth is going to be in NEEs, these newly emerging economies, so China, India. They are going to be using much more energy, not just because of industry, lots of other factors as well, but that is where most of the growth is going to come from. The third one then is transport. As well as perhaps transporting food around the world, as well as perhaps transporting some of the products that are made in these factories around the world, people also want to transport themselves around, whether that's from country to country or just around and about in their daily lives. As living standards improve, as countries get richer and they get more developed, people want to own a car. Some families want to own more than one car. And all of that adds to the increasing demand for energy, particularly oil fuels like diesel and petrol. But also we can think about how maybe international air travel or even short-haul air travel, people flying between airports in the UK or flying on cheap flights within Europe. All of that sort of transport has become much more accessible, it's become cheaper, and as a result of that, we're going to be using more energy. The fourth one is urbanisation. So this is where we're thinking about that growth in the proportion of people living in towns and cities compared to the countryside. One really important thing to understand, remember about urbanisation, is that people living an urban lifestyle tend to use more energy than people living a rural lifestyle. So as people in newly emerging economies or low-income countries, as they move to cities, they start to suddenly have access to things like electricity, transport that they wouldn't have had access to in rural areas. That pushes up the demand for energy and means that that growth in energy consumption is being pushed up higher in those low-income and newly emerging economies. So it links a little bit with what we've been talking about already with industry and with transport. Fifth thing, that's all to do with wealth. Again, there are some links that we can draw here. I've already mentioned that maybe as people become wealthier, they want to have access to transport, they want to buy more things, they want to eat more food. Therefore, we can link quite closely to some of the other aspects of factors driving up energy consumption. Essentially, as people get richer and as countries get richer, people want more luxuries. Those luxuries might seem quite trivial to you or I, like a washing machine or a television, but all of those things use energy, and therefore that is going to push up the demand for energy, and therefore energy consumption is going to rise to meet that demand. So for the sixth one, you were asked to come up with another reason in the blank hexagon. Now you might have come up with a different example to the one that I've come up with. I've chosen technology, and I'm going to explain that to you in just a second, but it doesn't matter if you've come up with a different reason, that's absolutely fine. There are other things that you might have mentioned. Again, we can draw some links with technology, we can link it to wealth, we can link it to industry, and basically as people start to have access to more technology, particularly in high income countries, if we think about our homes and our workplaces, those things are full of different forms of technology, lots of that technology running off electricity. So as the access to technology increases within a population, so goes up the demand for energy. And the final thing that you had to do on this page was to explain the impact of population growth on energy consumption. Now, the increase in population links with all of the factors that we've just been talking about. So as the population of the world grows, energy consumption is also going to rise because more people need more food, more industry, more transport, more housing, more technology. So the rise in population is the main thing that is driving up energy consumption, as well as the population that already exists getting richer. Those two things are having a big influence. We can put some numbers on this when we think about the world's population. So currently, 2019, 2020, the population of the world is around 7.7 billion. That's expected to increase to 9 billion by the time that we get to 2050. So those extra 1.3 billion people all need to eat food. They all need somewhere to live. They all will require some form of consumption. So therefore, the rise in energy consumption is only going to increase. Now, it's worth thinking as well about where most of that population growth is going to come from. Now, Africa is actually expected to see the most population growth over the next century. Populations in Europe and North America, they're not going to change very much. If anything, they're probably going to shrink as we've got quite an ageing population. But Africa is going to see its population increase significantly in the form of billions of more people. What this means is, as well as that driving up consumption, it also offers an opportunity in so much as the energy systems and the way people use energy in Africa is not really yet that well established. Therefore, there's an opportunity to think about actually how do we do that in such a way that's going to be quite kind to the environment, it's going to be quite sustainable. And finally then, on page 10, you had another little set of hexagons to try and complete, and these were all about how developments in technology can have both a positive and a negative impact on energy supply and consumption. So we're going to talk through each of these in turn. Again, you might have written down different things, so don't worry if you've written down slightly different notes to the ones that I've written down, and don't worry if you've given a slightly different example to the one I have at the end. The first one at the top, we'll start here. This is hinting at how technology has allowed us access to reserves that perhaps we couldn't have accessed before. Good example of that is fracking for things like shale gas. So in the past, that technology didn't exist. There were gas reserves there, but we couldn't access them because the technology didn't exist to enable us to do that. When that technology has emerged, we're now able to access those gas supplies. Now, what that's done is meant that maybe the consumption of gas has increased, because as we have more supply of something, the cost comes down, people are more likely to be using that as a form of energy. The other form of technology that's improved and developed significantly over the past 20 years or so is the technology related to renewable energy. So whether that's offshore wind farms or solar panels, this renewable energy has become more readily available as that technology has become more reliable, and also as that technology has become cheaper. As we start to make more and more wind turbines or more solar panels, the cost of those things comes down. That cost is particularly important when we think about low-income countries or newly emerging economies. I mentioned earlier how Africa presents a bit of an opportunity in terms of how it develops its energy sector. Renewable energy could play a really, really significant part in the electrification of the African continent. The third hexagon is all about energy efficiency. So not just fuel efficiency in cars, but also in aircraft, in shipping. All of those things mean that because of technology, the consumption of energy in those sectors is coming down. That again presents a really positive thing, that actually we're making some steps in the right direction in terms of fuel efficiency. The same can be said for the efficiency of our homes and buildings as well. So with improvements in technology like LED lighting, for example, homes and workplaces, they're becoming more energy efficient. So we're wasting less energy as a result of that technology. The other thing that is being rolled out across the UK at the moment, things like smart meters, so people can see in their homes how much energy they're using, and they can be more mindful of maybe not wasting electricity. The fifth one is very similar to the point I made earlier about technology. So as we have more electrical devices in our homes and in our lives, that leads to a greater demand for energy. So that is pushing up the consumption side of things. You then had to come up with maybe a final reason, a sixth reason in the blank hexagon of how technology can have a positive and negative impact. One thing I would say is maybe that technology has reduced the cost of energy for some people. So as a result of fracking, as a result of renewable energy, those two things have particularly pushed down the cost of electricity and the cost of natural gas for different groups. So people in the past who might not have been able to afford to access certain forms of energy can now do that, because that technology has meant that the energy is cheaper and it's more readily available. I hope you found that useful. Hopefully that's given you some extra things to add to your booklets or enable you to check the things that you maybe weren't sure about. Tune in next week for round 3.